It's midnight here. All right, continue. Yes. Yeah. It's I'm not used to it. I'm a father of two now, so uh,
Congratulations.
thanks. All the sleep I can get, but it's worth it for this.
Oh,
I just
good.
want to say for the just my wife and my daughter, they're at the hospital. My daughter's having surgery done in the mouth. It's nothing dangerous. It's
Okay.
planned and everything.
Okay.
But my son is here, and he usually sleeps well. But if I have to
Not
rush away, you know what's going on.
not a problem. Not a problem. Well, I
Yeah.
read the little that you wrote. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, so yeah, my name is Adrian, and I'm 30 years old, 31 this summer, and I was born here in Stockholm, where I live, and had some notes here. Yeah, I'm the youngest of five children.
Wow, big
Um,
family.
not as big as yours. So how many children
I've got
do
five
you have?
kids.
You get five kids, yeah.
Yeah. Big for modern
So
family, not big in terms of human
exactly.
families.
And raised in a suburb to Stockholm, really ethnically diverse, like working class background. That's where I come from. My father and my mother were both like active communists, which is not that uncommon in Sweden.
Huh.
It's we're kind of skewed to the left, politically speaking, with the whole country, and so it's not the most common thing, but it's not completely unheard of, and socialism is kind of a big influence with the whole social democratic party and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
although there's debate about what's socialism and so on, but so I'd say, like, religious wise, there was sort of well, at least some dose of arrogance towards religion and some hostility towards it, as well as Sweden being really, really secular. Although that term for me has now completely changed since I read Tom Holland's book Dominion
Yeah.
and started
Yeah.
listening to your conversations about that and stuff. So, and then I guess in my young 20s, some things started to change. I'm a physiotherapist since 7 years now, and being in physio school really opened up some things in terms of, well, some things that would like bear fruit later on. In the You'll be interested to hear about this. I think in the pain field right now, there's a big change going on. There's a movement towards understanding narrative, for instance, like the
Huh.
whole narrative around pain is really, really, yeah, a growing movement around that. Like, researchers and clinicians begin to see the importance of the patient speaking out their narrative and changing the narrative, because it's often an unhelpful narrative around chronic pain, chronic musculoskeletal pain, that is. Um, so reconceptualizing pain is a big thing. So I started to think about that, and also there's interest in that field with consciousness, of course, which ties into that whole thing. And they're really trying to work out many of the issues that the corner of the internet that you're involved in is trying to work out.
That's
Um,
fascinating.
a lot of things. I wrote some things down here. For instance, does pain have a purpose? That's one thing. Um, does it? Can we speak of it having purpose? Well, that would mean that the whole, like, standard model of how we view things today needs to change, because we can speak about purpose in terms of evolution and stuff like that. Understanding emergence, because it's really popular right now to speak of pain as having emergent qualities, or the brain having emergent qualities. And then, we sort of need to inject some Jonathan Peugeot into that conversation, and know what does it emerge to, what does it meet from above with the emanation. So that's one thing. Understanding the placebo effect, of course, is another. So listening to those topics, thinking about that, trying to work out that in clinical practice, I've always been really focused on engaging with people, not doing a lot of manual therapy or exercise. I mean, that's the easy stuff. I've always tried to listen to people and help them work out their story. And that, I think, set some things up for later on, because I was really into the Four Horsemen. Like a lot of people follow them, really skeptically minded, scientifically minded, and found some, I guess I found a narrative in that as well, something to live into. But then when I met my then future, now present wife, and started thinking about having kids, I mean, all these questions about meaning, purpose, what is life for, all these things came to the fore, and really developed into, well, the meaning crisis. I mean, you know all about that.
Yeah.
and I don't know how things happen, but I stumbled upon Jordan Peterson, like a lot of people do.
Yeah, that's right.
some weird clip on YouTube where I was watching some atheist debate, I guess, and I was never really interested in the political stuff, although I have changed dramatically politically as well. I mean, I was an active communist once, and it's that seems super far gone right now. I mean, I feel a bit more conservative. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, so the biblical series was big for me. I think I watched that like 4 or 5 times or something. Really thought about those things and discussed it with a few people who are close to me, and try to work those things out. And I think, I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Rationality Rules who talked about the staircase that Jordan led people up, and then maybe there was a door there, the door that C.S. Lewis talks about in his books. You can open, and maybe you'll find something there.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself going up that stair, because like one of the things Jordan said really stuck with me. Is like, there has to be something to us. Like it's lines like that over time changes you, together with you have a sense of that you need to change the narrative and the way you exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going through all that, and then I think, I don't remember in what order things happened, but I stumbled across you, and that's been really, really helpful. And Jonathan Peugeot, of course, and some other folks in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And things have been happening, and change happens over a few years, and weirdly enough, I find myself as an Orthodox catechumen.
Oh my goodness.
And it's so, I don't know how to even conceptualize things where I'm at right now, but yeah.
Wow. So what was it? What was it like going to church for the first time, and how did you choose one?
Well, I went to like the Swedish, let's say, state official church. It's now officially separated from the state, but not really, I guess. When I was on paternity leave with my son, because they have an open like preschool for kids, and I was then at the point where I wanted to start to somewhat participate, not just having it all up here, but a lived bodily reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember sending an email to Jonathan Peugeot actually, and like writing down my story shortly and just thanking him and asking him for some tips how to move forward. And I was thinking about maybe he'd recommend a book or something.
Yeah.
And then he said, I go to church. And me at the time, I was like, come on, Jonathan,
Yeah.
come on. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go to church, you know.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then I found myself after maybe a year or so, like, okay, I probably need to. It didn't seem healthy, honestly, to just keep things in the head, because in the mental space, because that created sort of a rift.
Yeah.
So I went there, and it's, I would say, I don't want to be too critical, but it's quite secular, that
Yeah.
that church. It's quite political as well.
Yeah.
But at least, you talk to people, you talk to a priest, you talk to other people, they're kind, you get into a relationship with people.
Yeah.
um Still felt very weird, but less weird,
Yeah.
than before. For a short time I went to a Catholic church, just attended mass a few times, spoke with
Yeah.
a priest, and then into that the Orthodox church where I'm at right now a few times. And honestly, it feels weird, but but I don't trust that emotion that much, and it's not only weird, but you talked before about losing status when
Yeah.
when becoming converting or
Yeah.
speaking about religion in depending on, of course, on what circumstance you're in. But I'm experiencing losing status to myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
to my baggage, to my old self.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a weird thing.
Well, it's, that's built into the Christian story, because Christ loses status. I mean, Philippians 2, starts, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, maintained, but made himself nothing, taking the status of a slave,
Yeah.
by which God raised him up. So it's that there's a lot to that. And for someone living, I would imagine, probably, I've never been to Sweden. I don't know that much about the country, but I would imagine just in secular society in general, yeah, you lose status because you go to this place on Sunday. At least in the United States, there's still enough of a community that does it, that depending on the microclimate that you're in
Mm.
culturally. But I would imagine in your case, but at the same time, given what you've said already about yourself, about the physiotherapy and about pain, you're already you're already sort of biased towards making sure your mind doesn't get too far ahead of your body.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have that tendency.
Yeah.
I have the tendency, but and you've been very helpful here.
Oh, thank
I
you.
think you've been very helpful here, recognizing parts of that and speaking to, for instance, what we just talked about, how weird it can be to go to church, and how church is actually not full of only holy people, but people from all walks of life who maybe you don't want to engage with, or
That's true.
and all of that. And so it's been an attempt to temper all of that. And I mean, I just contrasted with, I remember going to baptism for a friend of my wife, maybe like 6 years ago, like before all of this started to happen in me. And I just feel, and I've always felt so, like, partly annoyed and partly like completely not understanding the words that are spoken in church.
Yeah.
They're just gobbledygook.
Yeah.
It's repeating phrases that seemed completely meaningless, and And now, on the other side of that, it's a it's a Vervaekian opening, you know.
Yeah, yeah, reciprocal
When I
broadening.
hear exactly when I hear those words, and it's weird going through those changes, but I'd rather find myself on that side of the equation, you know, and the other side,
Well, good, good.
and I just So right now I'm in medical school
Okay.
since a couple of years back, and some of my thinking is trying to like apply the whole symbolic symbolic lens to my future medical practice, and you know you encounter some resistance there. Not that I'm outspoken with it, but
Yeah,
you get infused with a certain type of thinking and a mode of being, I would say,
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
from those studies. So I'm trying to work that out as well.
So the process from the physiotherapy onto medical school for you, um that's a fairly natural process in terms of you reach a certain level and then you can go back to school. Usually in the United States, I mean, anybody who becomes a doctor, they just sort of get submerged in the institution for 10 or 15 years. They come out a doctor, but it sounds for you, it can be a little bit more of a
Mm.
process.
I I had to go back because I didn't have enough
Okay. Yeah.
credentials, so I had to go back and do like a year of that and working part time. So and it took me maybe 4 or 5 years to decide to do it. So that's been a journey as well.
Okay.
But now now I'm in, and you know it's like a tube of toothpaste. Someone said, you know, you get out the other side once it's squeezed. So
Yeah, that's I've never heard that before, but that sounds about apt. I would imagine it takes pretty much everything from you that's in you just to get through it. So that sounds about right. Well, thank you for your story. That was really that's really quite remarkable. Um, what did you have in mind for our talk today? And you probably have a list, but where would you like
written
to
some
take
things
this?
down. I hmm, I was listening. I was listening recently to the Discarded Image
Hmm.
as an audiobook, and funnily enough, I saw the conversation between Andrew with the Bangs and Richard Rowland as well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because that was a difficult book for me. It
It's a
was
difficult book,
helpful to
period.
see that it was written for scholars, and I was like, oh, good.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know it was an audiobook. I didn't even know that. I read it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. That's probably more helpful many times, you know. And so he in the epilogue and during the book, he talked about the models
Yep,
that we have.
yep.
Uh, he contrasted the medieval model to the modern one, and he said something interesting about models and how they are updated and how new ones come about.
Yep.
Uh, and partly this question is relevant for me to understand my story, but I think this is going on the
Yes.
societal scale as well.
Yep.
You know, we've shifted models. Maybe you can see the starting around like 1500, the year 1500 or 1300, or I don't know, somewhere around there. And he said something interesting, that it doesn't. There's a bi-directional movement between models and us. Models change us, but we also change the models.
Yes.
Um, and that nature, which is our sister,
Yes.
not our mother, has lots of phenomena in stock. So depending on the model that we walk around with, the glasses that we wear, or how you want to conceptualize it, uh, nature can reveal different phenomena to us.
Yeah.
And he said that it requires a change in the temper of mind,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps a change of heart as well,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for a new model to come about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to work out a bit more about what in the underlying stuff has changed for the last perhaps few hundred years, I guess, that makes it possible for us to explicitly have the beginnings of a new model, because I see us moving away from modernism,
Yes.
perhaps via postmodernism, and Peugeot says that the world is being re-enchanted. Modernist would say that subjectivity is coming back in, like that's a negative thing. And how do you conceptualize this, and how do you think about it?
Well, you'll probably enjoy tomorrow's video because it's about 2.5 hours of this. So I'm leaving
Great.
on vacation tomorrow, and I don't know how many videos I'll do while I'm on vacation, because my
Yeah.
videos are always just thinking, but I'll have um, different responsibilities while I'm on vacation, and I won't have all my equipment there either. But
Mm.
so I just finished a video on which I'll probably, if we decide to share this, it would be quite a bit later because of just probably how I manage videos, and I usually don't usually don't put conversations in quite as quickly as I put the others.
Mhm.
So I just did a video on, oh, you're in Sweden, so this is even more fun. I've been watching the History Channel in the United States has done a series, a television drama called Vikings, which begins sort of at the raid at Lindisfarne, and then a lot of the engagement between the Vikings and the Saxons, and then the Franks around the year 800. And then
Mhm.
also I started watching that when my wife tested positive for COVID, so I suddenly had, I could watch what I wanted to instead of negotiating television viewing with my wife and children. And so then recently I've been watching the Last Kingdom, which is on Netflix here, which is a story set around 1000 AD, surrounding a Dane, someone who was born a Saxon and then raised a Dane, and the cultural back and forth. The second program, um, I don't like nearly as much, because although the Danes are sort of nested within a religious worldview that comes through from time to time in the show, usually inconsistently, the Christians in the show are remarkably corrupt, in that
Mhm.
only fanatics really believe, and usually the fanatics who do believe are using it as a lie. And then there are
Parasitic storytelling.
something like that.
Yeah.
And then some of those, even a good character who does believe, there's this one monk who is a friend of the main character. He seems to believe, but you find the Christians in that story not quite knowing how their religion and the worldview of a very brutal age actually go together. In Vikings, it was quite a bit better, both on the Viking side and on the Saxon side, on the Christian side. Both sides, at least the story was trying to work out how to integrate those things.
Mm.
And so the video is about, this will probably be redundant to people who watch this if it gets shared, because they'll say, yeah, I saw that video that you did. I started with Peugeot and Richard Rowland talking about the medieval period, and the observation that Richard Rowland made about, the question, why someone asked him a question, why is so much fantasy sort of located in a medieval period?
Mhm.
And then the rest is history. Podcast by Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook did an episode on Game of Thrones, which I hadn't watched Game of Thrones at all, an HBO story. But I thought, why is this history podcast doing something on Game of Thrones? And they also went into this question of these Tolkien, Game of Thrones, and then they didn't mention these other two series. They're quite a bit smaller. We're looking back at this medieval model, which, of course, in the discarded image, Lewis is wrestling with. Lewis is also looking back at the medieval model because the medieval model managed to, according to Peugeot, and I think he's right about this, managed to achieve a synthesis that, was certainly imperfect, as Lewis acknowledges, a synthesis, but it was something that was deeply meaningful. And Lewis actually says that in The Discarded Image at one point. He talks about how that model, and Lewis, right, Lewis says, well, we know, certain aspects of it are obviously wrong from certain viewpoints, but that model afforded tremendous meaning to those who lived it. And one of the things that I think, one of the contributions that Jordan Peterson has made has been the recognition, which should be obvious, and Vervaeke's made the same observation, that meaning is fundamental for human flourishing. When Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Well, what is the relationship between meaning and that word that proceeds from the mouth of God? Because we can't live without meaning. We really can't. We don't flourish without it. We wind up, this is where you get to Vervaeke's reciprocal narrowing. We wind up sort of like it's interesting during COVID, there's this, we've seen how some people are asymptomatic. They don't even seem to become, they're asymptomatic. They might not even become infected. And others completely fall susceptible. Now, quite clearly, people who have very active, robust, healthy immune systems, generally speaking, have no problem with the virus. Others, have a great deal of problem with the virus, and it can become life-threatening. It seems a life filled with meaning, is sort of like having a healthy, robust immune system in the world. It makes people healthy and robust in order to manage the trauma of this world, the pains of this world. And this becomes especially evident when you look at people like the Four Horsemen of the New Atheist Apocalypse, which didn't prove to be too much of an apocalypse. Because in the end, whereas they shone for maybe a decade, they are increasingly diminished by this point and continue to diminish. And their diminishment is not wrought at the hands of a tyrannical religious establishment, which would be what they might say, would topple them. But their diminishment seems to actually come from the science that they promoted as the answer. And where, just as in the story you described, various scientific disciplines are getting to the point of looking at enough data and saying, well, we don't know everything. And what if it, in fact, is the case that that meaning and story are integrally involved in human flourishing, even at the level that we, a level that can be measured and tested. So, and this shouldn't come as any surprise. Social scientists for years have been noting that religious people who have disciplined religious practices in their lives, generally speaking, outperform people who don't in measurable ways. They live longer, they are happier. I would say they are more robust when the kinds of normal traumas assault us, which inevitably come in life. And again, anybody who looks at this story from even an evolutionary posture might begin to say, well, it stands to reason, because the world seems filled with what secularists look at as religious people. Where are all the thriving atheist communities from antiquity? they you find little bits of atheism here and there, but they don't last long, and they're usually swallowed within the sea of religiosity.
Mm,
So, um, it a lot of people get anxious about the future of religion. Seems to me there's nothing to be anxious about, because you should far more be anxious about the future of atheism, because it just doesn't seem to endure much among human beings. And part of the difficulty that we have is we live such short lives, and the data set of our anecdotal circle around us is so small, but yet that's how we have to navigate. And so it's fascinating to me watching these conversations work themselves out. And then, part of what's been so strange about my life over the last few years are, these conversations. So I figure out a way to sort of keep a door open to randos, people who are nowhere in any relational circle of mine,
mhm.
that can approach me to talk, and then listen to stories like yours. Doesn't strike me at this point, now doing it a few years, as in any way unsurprising. So I certainly celebrate your story, but 3 years ago, I would never have imagined your story. But now there are whole groups of people who are coming to some of the same conclusions that you are. And even in a place like Sweden, it's an astounding thing that I don't know if enough people are paying attention to, but I'll pay attention to, because I'm not in charge of most people. I'm just in charge of me. So,
Yeah, yeah, that was good. That was helpful. I thought about one thing you said there in the beginning, and I thought about this before. I think C.S. Lewis again actually talked about this. We wouldn't feel satisfied with only social utility of religion. Oh, it helps people to feel happier, give to charity, so on. We want it to be true, but then again, we have to ask the questions: what does it mean to be true, and how does reality function? And yeah, those are the things that interest me a lot, because and that's where we talked about Jonathan pattern Peugeot.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The
I
apostle
think
of the apostle of purpose.
the apostle of purpose. I call him Jonathan, the way reality lays itself out, Peugeot.
That's right.
It's a phrase he often uses, and it's good, because I think that for like modern, scientifically minded brain, that type of thinking really helps. It's systematic. It's also a phrasing which doesn't trigger the normal uh, allergic reactions to religion. I think you spoke about this in one of your recent videos, that the wording is very important.
Yeah.
Vervaeke is very helpful in that sense, because
Yep.
he has come up with different sort of vocabulary for these things that open things up for us again. If we and just like speaking about like using a Greek term instead of an English term, it can really help, because this is new, this is fresh, and I see that in my story as well. I came across one thing today during a lecture that we had. We're into like biostatistics and ethics in research and stuff like that, talking about how you can't live within the scientific paradigm. I'll quote the lecturer here. He talked about actually the metaphysics behind modern day medicine, and he said that the mental is a epiphenomena, or shadow phenomena of the physical. Something happens in the brain that gives rise to an experience, something mental, which in and of itself is causally impotent. The mental has no direct effect. There is no mental substance that has an effect on the physical. And at the bottom layer of things, everything and all, including our experiences of reality, is a result of physical causes. For example, things happening inside of our brain. And this is good, he said, because this idea is not dualistic. But the mental is an epiphenomenon, but it's not dualistic. He then actually mentioned the placebo effect, that it would go against all of this, and that we're not really sure of how to understand consciousness. So he was a bit aware of this. But I thought about three things immediately. I thought about, what about the placebo effect? Where the meaning is the causal agent, you would say. And that if everything arises from like dead material causes, what does that say about our theories of the world? And their being real or not? And why should we trust them? And lastly, isn't the whole world, like the whole world we live in, proof of the opposite of that statement? I mean, how we have, gotten the mental into the matter and changed everything. It was weird. But I wouldn't been able to see that from maybe 3 years back.
Yeah.
I had an inkling back then, but not the vocabulary to actually see it and go, wait, this is actually wrong.
Yeah. and it's like you said, especially with your third point, it's dramatically strange, exactly what you say, given the world we're living in. You're in a room full of full of people who are sacrificing an enormous amount, the whole tube of toothpaste, in order to become something. Did you all just eat a soft-boiled egg on the same day and that, therefore doctor? I mean, it's just, why are my hands moving right now? I hear, somehow you physically caused something through the internet, through Zoom, that made me have an exclamation and my hands moving. So if given that worldview, you would have to say that I am somehow causally connected to Zoom and my responses are being transmitted physically, and that's yeah. Have you read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles?
Yes, and
yeah, because
that
this
was
is what he
difficult as
goes
well.
into. And this is sort of the paradigm that he begins the book with and says, well, this is sort of what the world teaches. Now, of course, with emergence and these these newer physicalisms, they try to get around some of these things, but you almost have the sense that you almost have the sense of the the early Copernican um, early Copernican mathematicians, the pre-Copernican mathematicians, just trying over and over and over to extend their old model. And it gets to a point where everybody just gives up on that model because the math is better the other way around. And I think that is what is sort of causing the age, the age of modernity to slowly dissipate. But these things do slowly dissipate. I mean, and again, we're very short-lived creatures, so we live in just a portion of it. But Lewis is such an interesting case because he saw these things quite early and he wrote about them quite persuasively. And that has to be, many people have noted that C.S. Lewis is a very strange hero for especially American evangelicals because he believed in evolution. There are a whole variety of beliefs he had that don't necessarily fit well with a dominant evangelical dogma. yet he's a hero. And we don't quite know why, but we know that he is. And so we go on from there. But so much of life is like that. We like to walk around imagining that we know what's going on, we're in control. That's almost pure rationality. But
Mm,
if we look closely at each other, I mean, my wife regularly exclaims how irrational I am about this or that or this or that. And I certainly see that in her. It's probably the case that we're both quite irrational, but we have this delusion that we're walking around in of our own rationalities, when even sympathetic observers look at us and say, "Eh, I don't really understand you that well, and you certainly don't seem as rational as I would like you to be, but well, there it is."
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
That's funny.
fascinating. Thanks for sharing that story with me about the lecture, because yeah, yeah, that is
It,
that
it,
is the
it, it
modern
could have
model.
been it could have been Sam Harris
Yeah,
holding the
yeah.
lecture.
Well, and it's in medical school, and that model then has implications for, yeah, so I pastor a church of mostly older people, and so now that they're into their 80s, they spend a lot of time with doctors and in hospitals. And this physicalist model,
Yeah,
and I regularly see the limits, because we have, I think, quite good medical care here in Sacramento. It's very expensive, but it's very good. And very, very often someone goes in to the doctor or the hospital, they're experiencing a symptom, and well, they're going to try this. They're going to do this test. They're going to try this. They're going to try this. They're going to try this. And okay, a lot of trial and error going on here. Um, so that physicalism that you're talking about is levels of complexity beneath what any of us can really know.
yeah, exactly.
And their lives, well, people who have smoked all their life, well, they tend to have higher rates of lung cancer and heart disease and stroke. Yeah. But when you walk into a doctor's office, the doctor is getting this time cross section of now, for which 80 years have built up to it, and
Hmm.
80 years of enormous complexity. So they might be a smoker, they might be a diabetic, they might be all these different things, but they've got all these other different things. I mean, it's
Yeah,
amazing. It
we
works at
tend to
all.
reduce it. We
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That people don't die
No.
just all the time. But we tend to reduce things. Oh, I have this shoulder coming in at 11.
I have a
And
shoulder coming in.
yeah, that's it's like a whole universe, a whole cosmos of a person being reduced to a joint. That's just
It would be
classic.
a horror film if only his shoulder came into the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's the rest of the person?
Yeah.
That's
And
hilarious.
and what you said about that has implications. Yeah, I'm aware of that more now, and it's a bit disheartening actually to see. It's there are other things that are on the positive side. Talk a lot about delving into the patient's perspective and a lot of those things, but I think we're confused because we contradict ourselves. On one hand, you say that okay, it's about the patient, it's about this, it's important to get their side of the story. But if we really get down to it, the world is meaningless. We're all just stuck in a body experiencing a movie. Hopefully, it's a good one. And it's this dissonance has to create issues somehow.
Yeah.
It's not healthy. it's
Yeah.
not. It has implications. It affects how we act in the world. It has to do.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And yet, modern medicine has, I just look at the advances in my own lifetime. I look at the advances in the 25 years that I've been pastoring this church. I mean, the advances in treating prostate cancer, the advances in treating all sorts of cancers. I mean, they're dramatically better than they were 2, 3 decades
Mm.
ago.
Yeah.
And so, you know, So if I'm hanging out with all the secular materialists, you can point to those things and say, wow, this model has tremendous power. And the medical establishment is a very impressive thing. And if you're hanging out with all of the symbolists, the both sides tend to lob at each other, but kind
Mhm.
of in the middle and say, at the same time, there's someone who, let's take the situation of pain again. As a pastor, people, sort of like a doctor, people come to me when there's something in their life that is stuck. And often that will be, especially with an older congregation. With younger people, it tends more to be relational things, which are really more difficult. With older
Mhm.
people, it often tends to be physical things, financial things, relational things too. But by the time people get into their 70s and 80s, a lot of the relational things have sort of played out. The 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s are heavy relational years, and then their
Yeah,
70s,
yeah.
80s, they've already been
They go up and
divorced.
down, and then we stabilize
Yep. Yep.
somewhat.
So it's, pain, chronic pain in people's lives. Once you get into your 70s and 80s, there's certain things that, well, they're not going to get fixed. You're just going to have to deal with it, and you're going to deal with it until you die. And so, I've seen people who've, been on, constant pain medication. And
Mhm, mhm.
uh, so it's, oh boy, it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. So any things on your list that you really wanted to get to, that we haven't touched on?
An endless list. I think that's we'll save it for another conversation. For me now, it's dealing with being. I find myself being in the same situation, I guess, as a lot of the early Christians. I'm in a
Yeah.
pagan family, in a pagan society, although the situation now is different because the society I'm in, I view it as it's within Christendom. It's not as Christian anymore, but it's within Christendom somewhat. But it has a lot of pagan influences, and in my life has taken some quite dramatic turns, and a lot of those relational things I'm working on, but that's a conversation with my priest,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Well, that's why
that's one
Jonathan.
side. Yeah,
That's why Jonathan said, "Go to church. You're going to need a priest. You're
exactly,
going to need a pastor. I
exactly.
mean, you're going to need somebody."
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's a,
Peugeot and I, we can't do it.
yeah. It has to be face to face as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
which this whole COVID thing really shows us, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has to be, one of the differences, so when I started doing these conversations, some people would say, well, you're kind of doing therapy. And I say, no, not really. Therapy is a specific thing. You know, what you do in ministry is, it's far it's therapy is in a box. Your life with your priest, your life with your church, it's much more out there in the wild. It's
Mm,
multidimensional, it's multi-layered, it's communal, it's
mm,
individual, it's all of those things. And it goes on in terms of time too. So no, that's right. That's right. Um, just on Pentecost, Job, who's been on my channel, he's from the Netherlands, uh, made profession of faith in his Dutch Reformed church. And I had talked to him, and he was, what should I do? And I told him the same thing. I said, well, what about church? I said, well, what's close to you? Why don't you start there? And for a
mm,
lot of people, like in your case, you got to start someplace, but then you keep journeying until you find the right home. And
mhm,
then,
mhm,
and for Job, I asked him, because he was a volunteer firefighter, and he had other firefighters. I said, do any of the people that are in your fire brigade, do they go to church? Oh yeah, a bunch of them. I said, go to church with one of them.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Start with a friendship.
yeah.
And, you know, and sometimes it'll take a while. You just might start with a church and you realize, no, this isn't the best place for me. And might take a few hops like it did in your case, but um, those who seek find, those who knock, the door will be open. That's the promise.
It's the promise.
So, well, thank you so much for this. This has been a delight.
Thank you. Thank you. I managed to get a slot, you know, so I took the chance.
I'm glad you. I often just do Wednesday slots, but you know, in anticipation of my vacation, I wanted a few more randos conversations in the can. So I will send you this video, and you can review it with anyone else who you would want to share it with. And if you think that this is something that you would allow me to share publicly, let me know, and I'll post it on the channel so others can watch.
Great. We'll do it that way. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you, Adrian. It was
Thank
a
you,
pleasure
Paul,
to
and
talk to
thank
you.
you for these last few years that I've been able to observe you. It's been tremendously helpful.
Well, thank you very much. Get a good night's
Great.
sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.